We are living in a dying democracy. The future of our liberty, which we so often take for granted, is being threatened by an enemy from within, and that enemy is the deteriorating emphasis and concern for civics as a subject of serious study by the citizenry of the United States. Our beloved Thomas Jefferson once said, "An educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people." Today, millennials stand to be the most educated generation in U.S. history, but they're not being taught what the common man of 1776 knew instinctively. Even as my generation learns the ins and outs of technology and makes use of the internet and other modern devices, we're not being taught what we are as Americans. The problem? A lack of knowledge and understanding of our U.S. Constitution. The effects? Reduced participation in our democracy. And the bottom line? If we do not reverse this problem, we will eventually lose our freedom. It was Ronald Reagan who said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same." Many Americans are unsettlingly blind about our Constitution and our duties to government. About how many? An Edinburgh poll released September 12th of last year asked 1,013 adults in the U.S. a series of questions and discovered the following. Only 26% could name all three branches of our government, and 1 in 3 Americans could not name a single branch. How can we feel confident about the security of our nation when only 26% of Americans can even name all of the branches of our government? But the poll didn't end there. It went on to ask what rights were protected by the First Amendment. A whopping 48% were able to identify freedom of speech as protected by the First Amendment. But a mere 15% remembered that it also protects freedom of religion. Freedom of press and assembly came in at 14% and 10% respectively. And is it even worth elaborating on the 3% who remembered the right to petition the government? 1 in 3 Americans could not name a single right protected by our First Amendment. Forget the security of our nation against foreign powers. How can we hope to retain our God-given, unalienable rights if our country doesn't even know what those are anymore? Now, these statistics should not come as a complete surprise, considering that 7 years ago, in May of 2011, a senior writer for ABA Journal reported that in 28 states, the average grade for history in terms of course content, clarity, and rigor were D's and F's. Further, a year later, a survey done by Xavier University asked 1,000 voting-age Americans 10 random questions from the United States citizenship exam, which one must pass in order to become a naturalized citizen in this country. The survey found that 1 in 3 Americans failed the test, answering 5 or more of the 10 questions wrong. Consider that 97% of immigrants applying for citizenship passed this test. Now, the survey had many other striking statistics, but the most interesting was that 71% could not identify the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. What are the effects of this constitutional ignorance? Well, let's be honest, it doesn't exactly play into our everyday lives, so who cares? I believe that John F. Kennedy said it best when he said, "The ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of all." What we see from a lack of understanding is a lack of appreciation. The New York Times reported on a national American election study, which has been conducted since 1948. And the results found a dramatic decrease in patriotism among millennials as opposed to previous generations. For example, while 81% of 69 to 86-year-olds would say that they love America, only 58% of millennials can say the same. Or while at least 70% or more of baby boomers believe their American identity to be very important, only 45% of millennials feel that way. Interestingly, that last statistic corresponds pretty well with the Gallup poll, stating that only 44% of American adults said they would be willing to fight and die for their country. I could go on to mention the decreasing volunteer rates for our military as a symptom of this lack of appreciation, but I believe that voter turnout more directly addresses the issue. According to the Pew Research Center, the average voter turnout in the U.S. over the past few elections has been a poor 55%, and the United States is ranked 27th behind other nations in terms of eligible voter turnout. Consider that from the mid to late 1800s, voter turnout averaged in the 80% range. What we are witnessing is the gradual dissipation of our democracy. The bottom line is that if we do not reverse this problem, we will eventually lose our freedoms. If you're not inclined to believe me, please consider the following. The Supreme Court has just agreed to hear a case on whether or not a California law passed in 2015 violates the right to freedom of speech. The law stipulates that crisis pregnancy centers must inform clients that the state subsidizes abortions. The law also provides that the Attorney General may prosecute those clinics which do not comply. Now, regardless of your views on abortion, this law is a clear violation of our right to freedom of speech. Elected representatives telling us what we must say, even if that might be contrary to our beliefs. And who elected the politicians who passed this bill? Possibly the 52% of Americans who could not identify freedom of speech as a right in our Constitution. You see, you can agree or disagree with anything I've just said, and it still doesn't matter, because ultimately no one in my generation even knows what the First Amendment is, let alone why it was passed. You see, my generation cannot carry on the debate that is coming to us because most of my generation doesn't know what the debate is. We cannot hope to sustain this democracy if we cannot even define the fundamental principles of our government. The full preamble of the Constitution says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America." We the people. But if we do not know our Constitution, then today's Americans are not the ones being described by that phrase, "we the people." That people, our founding fathers and patriots since then, knew and understood their rights enough to fight and die for them in combat, enough to suffer ravages in their homes for them. They cherished them enough to have them emblazoned in writing for the world to see and for their posterity to remember. So how do we fix this problem? Recognizing and acknowledging that there is a problem in the first place is half the battle. There are too many options to explore in the time that we have on educating our public about our Constitution. So I will focus briefly on our educational system, which needs fixing most urgently if we want to see lasting results. The evidence that the current educational system is inadequate can be seen in the fact that according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, only 24% of high schoolers are proficient in civics. Fortunately, in addition to programs like this one, there is a movement called the Civics Education Initiative, which is attempting to change school systems so that high schoolers must pass the civics portion of the United States citizenship exam in order to graduate. Already 15 states have legislated this change, and some 20 more have proposed similar sorts of legislation. However, at the end of the day, it is each of our individual responsibilities to be well-informed and educated on our government and Constitution, and to inform others, so that together we may reverse this trend of constitutional ignorance. I believe that Robert Kennedy summarized it best when he said, "The glory of justice and the majesty of law are created not just by the Constitution, nor by the courts, nor by the officers of the law, nor by the lawyers, but by the men and women who constitute our society, who are the protectors of the law, even as they are themselves protected by the law." Thank you.